Robin, is US healthcare going to lead the charge on regenerative medicine, or is it going to follow?
I think it will lead. Innovation is critical. People always want to come to the United States from other countries, when they have something, some terrible cancer or disease that they need, the best care and different options. And I think as long as the support is there for clinical development and innovation, that we will lead.
Welcome to Analyzing Healthcare by Scale Community, which is an education-focused organization comprising of passionate global healthcare leaders. Analyzing Healthcare is Scale's podcast series dedicated exclusively to unpacking the myths and foibles that have been directed at US and global healthcare for as long as we can all remember. Is US healthcare broken? The worst in the world? Perhaps, perhaps not. Let's find out together as we invite the thought leaders of healthcare to share their views. I'm your host, Roy Bejarano.
Okay, so I want to welcome everyone to the latest series of Analyzing Healthcare by Scale Community. We're joined again by Dr. Andrew von Eschenbach on the back of a wonderful podcast that we had together a few weeks ago, former head of the FDA. And we're also joined by Dr. Robin Smith. Robin, can you introduce yourself to the audience, a little bit of your background and why we're going to focus on regenerative medicine today?
Sure. I'm a physician by background and was very early in the stem cell arena of what you can do with stem cells and how they can be sort of optimized for different therapeutic areas for both treatment and regenerative medicine. And so it's been a great journey, and we've learned a lot about stem cells, about what's important about stem cells and different ways that they can be used.
Now, your focus has been on the research end or on the commercialization end, the government institutions and oversight. Where have you spent your time? At what type of organizations?
Yeah, so I was early in starting companies with using stem cells, more focused on adult stem cell therapies and collection of stem cells. Anytime there's a new innovative technology, you have to start at the beginning and do the research and understand how it is going to be regulated. Obviously, safety is the most important, and then its efficacy. So we worked with regulators, worked in doing the research, what's necessary for commercialization, and that's really where I've spent my career the last 20 years.
So would it be fair to say a heavier focus on research than actual delivery of care, or have you crossed over on both sides with actual commercialization, working with, orthopedic surgeons who are possibly experimenting with plasma and regen and stem cell?
Yeah, well, when you develop these kinds of therapies, you have to get into the clinic. And so you work with different physicians on how they can use it to help treat the different therapies, therapeutic indications. So if it's an orthopedic, it could be for pain, osteoarthritis, cartilage regeneration. There's other clinical indications that they can be used for as well. So it's a journey, and you always have to see that it's how it's going to be used in the clinic, how it's going to be regulated, then how it's going to be sold and delivered.
You worked? Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I have to say, Roy, I think Dr. Smith Robbins being a little bit modest.
I'm trying to entice
he's actually
the modesty.
He's actually written the book. But I think for your viewers, it's important to put what she has accomplished and what she's doing now in a little bit of context. Roy, you started out as one single cell, and somewhere 40 weeks later, there you were. So that mystery of growth and proliferation and differentiation is really at the heart of what Dr. Smith's been doing and working on. And it was actually from our previous conversation around oncology, it was really our attempt to try to understand the cancer cell, which is the most egregious disorder of cell proliferation and differentiation, that we began to understand some of those secrets of how you got from one cell to where you are. And it's all about stem cell biology, how those cells have genetic, molecular, and cellular mechanisms that enable them to renew and to heal and to do a variety of things that replenish us. So regenerative medicine is about that. It's not just eliminating disease, it's restoring health. And she's written the book as to helping us, how can we understand that better, which is the research side? How do we use that knowledge and turn it into actual ways that we can intervene and provide patients with something that corrects a disease or restores their health. And I think she'll tell you a little bit about some of those things that she's learned and some of those things she's developed from the point of view of commercialization, if you will, and some of those things she's bringing to patients right now.
Yeah, I want to get into some of the companies that you've worked at, that you've led, including, I see here, Spiritus Therapeutics, Extropin, Neostem, which was publicly listed. I imagine you've had a lot of exposure to a lot of other companies, whether it be consulting, board advisory, interaction, and primarily ignoring clinical research for a second. I want to come back to clinical research later, but focusing on what follows clinical research, the actual FDA approval and actual commercialization and broad application of stem cell therapy and regen therapy in its broadest sense. I want to get into the heart of where is this being applied most broadly? Where are the greatest number of patients benefiting from it today? What have you seen that from a public perspective, the public is interested in public well-being, which is a very broad term. There's 350 million people that define the public. They don't think in terms of clinical research studies. So where is this going mass, if at all? What's driving the successful adoption of it today? Where is it working?
So maybe before we get into that specific, just for the audience, because not everyone knows what regenerative medicine is, we could just step back for a second. Because when you look at a starfish, right, you're able to cut off the limb of the starfish and it grows back. And actually, the entire starfish can grow back on that limb. So we've lost our ability as we've evolved. We became humans. We can't really regenerate ourselves. We can do a little bit in wound healing. We can regrow hair, but you can't really regrow organs. You have a little bit of ability in the liver. If you have the tip of your finger come off, sometimes those can regrow. But we really can't regrow our organs. We've lost that ability. But as Andy said, and I think it's really important, is the stem cells are what evolve to become who we are today as humans. And we've learned so much of how the cells of our immune system, our stem cells, and other cells really can help us to treat disease, to help regenerate, to help signal there are certain things in the cells. And I think that's what's really important, is to understand this evolution of what we've learned from 30, 40 years ago, where stem cells were used to replace someone's bone marrow who've had cancer and has chemotherapy. They lose their ability to then treat, you have to, because the stem cells are in the bone marrow and other areas, and they're cancer-causing stem cells, you have to get rid of them. But by doing that, then you don't have this immune system to fight disease and down the road and for infection and other cancers. So you need a new immune system. So people have gotten bone marrow transplants, which are stem cells. So 30, 40 years ago, we've been doing this for a very long time. It's just, how do you then evolve it to other clinical indications, other areas of the body? How does it become more mainstream? And I think we've learned so much over time of how our immune system works, all these different cells that make up the immune system, what they can be done, what they can be used for, and how they can be turned into either a diagnostic tool or a therapeutic. And I think that's the field, and that's where things are emerging.
So I think that's very interesting, because that's sort of analogous with technology in general. In many cases, I was just recently learning that artificial intelligence was a term coined in 1953. We've been playing around with artificial intelligence for 80 plus years. But all of a sudden, and by the way, where artificial intelligence beat Kasparov in chess, this was IBM's Blue, I can't remember, Blue Mind, Blue something, in 2007. And so the evolution of technology, often defined by our own imagination, right? As you said, Robin, bone marrow stem cell benefits have been there for a while, but the application of it in other ways, adult stem cells in other ways, takes time. And all of a sudden you become an overnight celebrity, because wide relevance to public need becomes something that's the public catches wind of, right? And this is like the launch of LLMs, ChatGPT. All of a sudden, AI is available to everyone all day long. And it's those inflection points that I find really interesting. So has there been, back to my question, has there been an inflection point with stem cell therapy that you can point to say, Well, before that, it was sort of understood. It was sort of relevant to the average person. But post that discovery, it suddenly became relevant to a much larger pool of people and their lives.
Andy, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that. I think it's an interesting storyline that we just started to develop. Stem cells in the bone marrow have been around for clinical use for a long, long time because they were there and basically they were ready to perform, if you will. We just had to coax them along. But what we've then done over a period of time is begun to learn how to manipulate the stem cells and how to teach them to wake up and to do things that we want them to do. We can teach them to turn into something else. So I can derive a stem cell from your skin or your fat and genetically modify it and teach it to be something different, like a nerve cell, etc. So we're evolving the ability to manipulate the stem cells, to reawaken them and to teach them to do things we want to do. And where that's really paying off dividends today is in the area of oncology, where you can take white blood cells, the immune cells, and the stem cells that create those immune cells, and you can genetically modify them by teaching them to respond to a cancer antigen. So they then really come back into the body and proliferate, but in a way that is targeting a cancer cell. So CAR T cells, for example, are a real major example of that. But then I think what you'll hear from Dr. Smith is she's taken this to another level, and I'll let her explain the work. But the point is, it's one thing for you to teach the cell to do something, but to also then learn what is it inside the cell that's actually doing it. And can I use that? So can I use the component rather than the whole cell itself? And I'll let her tell you about exosomes.
I mean, that's a key point. It's a good one. So I think part is what's evolved is, all stem cells aren't alike. They come from different parts, and where they come from dictates what you can do with them, right? And same is the fact that you don't necessarily just need the whole cell. And I think that's what Andy's talking about is the benefit of a stem cell is what's inside of it. And so you don't necessarily need the whole cell, the DNA, you don't need that. But there are these exosomes, these little packages, they carry all this incredible materials, nucleic acid, peptides, all these ingredients that are how cells signal from one cell to another. And so the key in all of this regenerative medicine is, are you trying to replace tissue or are you trying to affect function? You may have something in your body that isn't working properly, but the organ is there. Then you're just trying to affect its function. Other times you may need a new organ. So in that case, you may need the stem cell, and the stem cell by itself may not be enough. You may have to have a scaffold that you put the stem cells on, and that can develop into what you need. So there's all different applications, and it's depending upon whether you want to repair, you want to restore, and that's really what this is all about. And so we've been very focused on exosomes, which are these packages of the nucleic acid and different peptides and different, vitamins and ingredients that go from cell to cell to help send a message, to help even genetically you can turn on the genes based on what's in these exosomes. And that is what's most exciting. And that is where I think a lot of the future we're going to see in regenerative medicine.
So I want to come back to that in a second as a layman, get into exosomes and what that means. But I want to be obnoxious and stubborn with my framework with these questions, because I think there's something there that I want to know, and I think the public wants to know. I'm seeing, as a layman, stem cell technology, regenerative understanding percolate across different specialties. So what might have started, as Andrew said, a heavy focus on oncology, bone marrow transplants to address cancer, is now applied in musculoskeletal injury, spine and joints in different countries to different extents, right? Depending on whether these treatments have been fully approved or not. But plasma therapy, stem cell therapy for disc degeneration, it's being applied in neurology. I don't know how far into that we are with things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, but it's a different field. it's been applied in organ development. I don't know how far advanced we are there in 3D bioprinting, but I know that there's a whole space there. And wound therapy, skin wound therapies, there's just a expansion of application that's going on here, which is in itself very exciting. I'm still pushing for this question with all the different directions that this technology is manifesting. What do you see as being the most prevalent today? Where is stem cell therapy being used most frequently? Where is the public benefiting from it the most? And can you name a company? Just like when we think of drugs, first company I think of is Pfizer. When I think of GLP-1, Novo Nordisk. When I think of AI, I think of NVIDIA. Is there a company, a brand that you attach to the application, the actual commercialization of stem cell therapy that comes first and foremost in your mind?
Do you want me to take that, Andy?
Yeah, sure.
So I understand where you're going, and I'm going to answer it, but I just want to emphasize the point that I think what's evolved is you don't necessarily need the whole stem cell, right? So I think that, for example, Mesoblast just got an approval for a graft versus host disease. Of course, that stems from originally what we've seen with a bone marrow transplant. There are some companies that have done a little bit on, working on valves or Dr. Tala with bladders. So we are seeing the use of the entire stem cell for certain regenerative properties. But I think where things are really moving toward, and we're going to see tremendous impact in musculoskeletal disease, like you're talking about for pain, osteoarthritis, an enormous amount in wounds. And I want to talk about skin and hair and wounds, the aesthetic part as well, is the exosomes. You don't need the whole cell. And there are advantages to that because the cells divide, there's DNA, there's other issues around using the whole stem cell where I don't think it's necessarily needed if you're trying to get your own body to repair itself or to genetically turn on and off certain proteins that it's making. So as Andy was saying with cancer, how do you get your own cells of your body to do something differently to enhance whatever it is, whether it's skin that needs to be rejuvenated, whether it's hair that needs to be grown, whether it's maybe heart muscle that you need to have an impact so that you don't have as much scarring. Some people are using stem cell therapies to try and treat that, but other people are realizing that you can take the exosomes, which come from the stem cells, and do something with them. You can genetically modify them. You can cargo load them. You can tune them based on what to put in that cargo, something more specific. And that's where we're seeing advancements. And Exotropin is really one of the leaders in doing this, especially in hair, wounds, skin, and other sort of areas where you can use the exosomes to reprogram the cells of the body.
And from someone looking in who's never heard of the word exosomes before, messenger cells, proteins?
They're not cells. They're small membrane-bound vesicles that are secreted by that stem cell. They're secreted into the extracellular environment. So it's like an outpouching of the stem cell. And in it, they have all kinds of different proteins and nucleic acids, lipids, different metabolites. And that is this way you go from cell to cell. You communicate through these exosomes. They take the message, they run, they hone, they know where to go, and they deliver that message, all those great ingredients, to the next cell.
So what we're interested in is in our own body's, our ability to communicate with certain parts of our body, mRNA, exosomes, and help influence those elements that in themselves help direct action within our body to do certain things.
Exactly. Cells to proliferate, to migrate, to differentiate, to repair.
Yeah, to repair, right? So how do you tell your neck to repair itself other than praying to God, which sometimes works, but unfortunately I have a bad neck. Everyone knows because I repeat that part on this podcast religiously. But other than telling my neck to repeat itself, to heal itself, nothing happens. But telling mRNA to instruct my RNA and my DNA to heal my neck, something might happen. Is that fair?
Well, let me try to come at that for you a little bit, because
and let me get to the other question that I have attached to that is finding these these membranes, finding these stem cells, finding these partners to work with, these messenger elements within our body is not that easy, and being able to find them in greater abundance. My sense is there's more exosomes floating around out there than maybe mRNA. So the supply of finding these messenger vehicles is interesting. And the more we find, the more options we have to interact with, the happier we are. So that's a question, not a statement.
Andy, start.
Yeah, for your listeners, this can become very, very complicated and confusing. So let me begin with the basics. All the cells in your body are talking to each other. And there are messages going back and forth from one cell to the other. So if you happen to have a meal, there's going to be a message from one cell that says there's sugar coming into the bloodstream, and a message that goes to another cell that says in the pancreas, you better put out some insulin. So these messages are going about all the time. And what Dr. Smith's talking about is we're learning about these messages. They can be small hormones, or they can be little care packages that put a lot of things together. And they're going to go around and give messages. But the message is only a part of the story. So, for example, if you want to regenerate an organ, you have to have cells that are talking to each other. And you have to have a matrix or a scaffold for which those cells can get organized and get developed, because they're going from a cell to a tissue to a three-dimensional organ. And that is a very complicated process. So your initial question is really one about promise and peril. So there's been a lot of promise that we could get these cells and we can inject them, and suddenly you're going to feel like you're 25 years old, or we'll put them in your knee and you're going to be perfectly normal again. Not true. That's promise. But there's peril, because if you go too fast and you don't know enough, you may do more harm than good. So yes, we're continuing to do research, and you'll hear at some point from some of the research that's being done at the Wake Forest Institute of Regenerative Medicine that's moving towards commercialization, where you can take cells and different kinds of stem cells and get them to work together in 3D printing to make a cornea for someone's eye that's blind. That is promise that's within our grasp, but there's peril that you can't do that until you really understand how it's going to work and what the risks and benefits are. So she's giving you one piece of the story, but it's a critically important new piece of the story we didn't understand before. We just thought in terms of a chemical like a hormone. This is more than that. This is a care package that's got a lot of good stuff.
And the care package, right? So that has things in them like these miRNAs that can modulate the immune system, right? So you talked about your neck. So if you put those exosomes there, it may say, oh, you have a lot of inflammation, too many cytokines. You have something that's causing pain, and that's not necessary. And it can help you, change what's being made by the mRNAs, the different proteins, to reduce some of the cytokines, to reduce the inflammation and help for pain. So it may not be ultimately you make a new disc, which is what Andy's talking about. And there's really exciting stuff around that, but you can have an impact on the performance of the cells that are there that can affect pain. It can affect skin, hair, and other things that can be very meaningful.
I want to come back to this paradigm of promise versus peril, because I think it's so helpful. And I think it speaks to how the average person, myself included, thinks about medicine and grand discoveries in medicine. Because I think it's quite accurate. We tend to gravitate to the promise without too much technical knowledge at all. I'm learning about exosomes as we speak, real time in this podcast. So there's so much oceans of information that we don't have. And so we try to anchor around large objects like a promise of no more reliance on pain medication, no more reliance on excessively aggressive surgery or a very heavy-handed chemotherapy. and the promise of substituting that with direct cures that are targeted and perfectly effective. Returning to my youthful days. It's the elixir of all elixirs. Why should we ever get old if we just regenerate like a lizard's tail? But this other half of the coin, the peril, is very interesting to me because there's a lot packed into that, right? We've been hearing of the myths, the wonder of regenerative medicine for a long time. Organ transplants substituted by 3D bioprinting, that's been out there. I remember seeing, the 60 Minutes videos decades ago. So why isn't this prevalent everywhere all the time? Why isn't this standard practice for the average pain physician, the average orthopedic surgeon to deploy regen medicine? Why, to some extent, the vast majority of these solutions still on standby? What is the peril? What is going wrong here? Is it that the medicine is great, but we have a very slow FDA approval process, which you could obviously speak to, Andrew? Is it the medicine is okay, but these clinical trials, they still struggle because the following tends to happen and we still need to fine tune a lot? Is it because there's a lack of funding, which I struggle to believe because it seems so high impact and the market size here, the demand is limitless, but maybe the money, it just hasn't been there. Is there something wrong with the approach that we're taking with clinical trials? I know there's been a lot of change in who's running clinical trials these days across America. What is impeding the wide adoption of this medicine today as opposed to 5 years ago, 10 years ago?
Robin, you've been
Go ahead.
receiving
Start.
that.
Maybe the premise is wrong. Maybe this is...
I'll start. I'll kick it off.
Start.
I really think she's been on the front lines of battling exactly the kinds of things you're addressing. How do you take an idea to concept? How do you develop a sufficient degree of evidence with regard to both its efficacy and its risk or safety, and then bring that to the point where it can be provided to patients? I would say this, think of it in the following way. There are levels of complexity. It starts out with the cell, and we talked about that before. But then the cell becomes, along with other cells, a tissue. And that's very simple structure. It's only got two dimensions, like a piece of skin. And then it goes from there to a structure that's a little bit more complicated, like a tube, like a blood vessel. And then you get to the point where now it's in 3 dimensions and it's solid, like a kidney or a liver. And even that has multiple complexities within it because it's not just a simple, straightforward, homogeneous piece of tissue or an organ. It's got different kinds of parts and pieces in it. So making a heart or making a kidney is an amazingly complex undertaking. And what we're learning is that maybe we can get past some of that complexity. So we don't have to make the whole kidney. We can use the basic structure of the kidney and just replace certain cells within the kidney. So where I'm going with that, Roy, is to help your viewers understand that when we talk about regenerative medicine, we're talking about everything from one single cell to us being able to create a new organ for you. And we're not completely across that entire spectrum yet. We're working our way through it, and we're getting better and better at all the parts and pieces of it. And some things are already in place. We can replace and grow up in the laboratory certain structures and provide those to patients. But we are not at the point where I can make a new kidney for you. But will we get there? Can we get there? The answer is yes, because proof of concept has already been established, but we have not done it in a way that I could say to you as a regulator at the FDA, this is effective and safe and permissible to be offered to patients widespread. It's still an experimental investigational undertaking.
And
The FDA is very proactive in terms of advancing cellular therapies and regenerative medicine, but we will always insist upon data that's sufficient to prove that it does what you say it does, and it does it safely. And I'll let Dr. Smith tell you about some of the barriers when she's on the other side of that regulator.
I think, yeah, to add to what you're saying, Andrew, and it's a really good point, is, not all stem cells, not all exosomes are alike. Where they come from matters. So whether they come from the bone marrow, whether they come from fat, whether they come from, your own skin, like Andy was talking about earlier, that can, be reprogrammed. There's many different sources where they come from. And then the question is, how are they different? So how do you know to use which ones, for which indication? And then the question is, how do you deliver them? So it matters where they come from, the source. It matters how they're manufactured. It matters how they're delivered, when they're delivered, how much is delivered. And that's what all of these trials are about, is trying to figure out, a consistent treatment, a consistent therapy that you can over time and see the outcomes. And that's what all of these clinical trials, all of this time is, what is it? How does it work? And, how is it delivered? And that takes time and it takes money. And that's why I think the field hasn't advanced quite as quickly. Now, I think the exosomes are going to make that a little bit easier. When you say there aren't maybe a lot of them, every cell has exosomes. It's the way we communicate. So there are a lot. And there are going to be ways people are realizing that there's certain almost signatures, if you will, to disease. So a certain pathogenesis of a disease, you may be able to see that in the exosome. So there may be a whole diagnostic component where in the urine, you may see from someone's exosomes that they have a certain cancer, or, they're predisposed to a certain disease. So there's a whole diagnostic piece to this. And then there's the therapeutic piece, that if you can signal to the body to do something differently, to either fight a cancer or to reduce inflammation like an autoimmunity, or to make more cells because you have to repair damaged tissue, all of these different ways of treating in either some pathology or some organ or some sort of, trauma that's occurred, they're all there. And the question is, which are the right exosomes? Where do they come from? How many do you give? And what you can do to them to help optimize both their ability to hone to where they're needed and to the message that they are delivering.
I get that the exosomes come in greater supply, and I'm getting the sense almost that clinical trials for stem cell therapy has been difficult, slower than expected. And it raises the question, have other countries, I know Israel comes up as a stem cell haven, maybe parts of Asia, have they pushed further ahead than us? The presumption is, reckless, crazy, cowboys over there, they don't know what they're doing. We have the FDA, but maybe there's another explanation for that we need to dig into a little bit deeper. But I also can't help but be, and it's the benefit of being somewhat ignorant in science. I just didn't have the brain power, unfortunately. My next life, I get to ask really stupid questions, and there's a joy in stupid questions. So here's one that I'm particularly proud of. It just occurred to me. mRNA is technology used for the COVID vaccine, right? I think that was the Pfizer vaccine that I took. And mRNA plays with cells' ability to engage in fighting infection, right? Immune response. That timeline was super quick, less than a year from start to finish. So if they can move that quickly on mRNA technology for the purpose of immune response, why not move relatively quickly for the purpose of stem cell therapy in orthopedics? Why are we seemingly dragging this thing out? Want to get to the bottom of that.
Andy?
Yeah, well, it depends on what your objective is and what you want to accomplish. You're using an example where taking mRNA as a message to tell a cell that it should make an antibody or it should get ready to fight a virus is orders of magnitude less complex than trying to take a cell and tell it to make a new cartilage disc for your knee. So there is an order of magnitude of complexity that makes one go faster than the other. But let me go
like driving versus flying.
Let me go back to your initial question. There is no Pfizer or there is no Novo Nordisk in regenerative medicine. Most of what regenerative medicine progress is occurring is in what I would call boutique endeavors that are academic at their foundation or basis, because that's where the fundamental research and understanding of the mechanisms, genetic and molecular and cellular mechanisms, is occurring, that informs the development of the product that you, whether it's a cartilage replacement or an exosome to promote healing or to promote the growth of a hair follicle. So it starts with academia, and then the companies are startups, and they are pursuing a particular part of the puzzle or opportunity, and it's hard. It's costly. It requires investment. So now you've got the next piece of the puzzle, which is, to your question, is there enough money? No. And do we yet have the full regulatory pathway in place? No. But so it's a process, it's a systems problem, and it's going to require a systems solution that gets us from discovery to development to delivery, and does that in an accelerated way. So your point, should we have a strategy? Yes. Should we have engagement of strategic partners, large pharma, large biotech? Yes. Should we have the regulator integrally engaged in what will it take for an approval? Yes. And do we need to continue to fund the research? Yes.
So this podcast is something we need to put in front of Jay Bhattacharya at the NIH, in front of our junior, and say, look, we understand that, we're $36 trillion in the hole here, but don't cut our stem cell therapy budget, because we need it. This is high impact stuff. It's going to change everyone's lives, and we need to be moving quicker, not slower.
Yeah. To your point, I think it's timely, even when we're thinking of SpaceX and sending something to Mars. We did it with NASA and put a man on the moon and brought him back in a decade. We can do this. The blind can see, and the lame could be able to walk. It's possible. Mother Nature has told us that it's possible. We just have to make it probable.
I'm glad you brought up space, because I was actually going to go there next, believe it or not. So like space, which has gone through its own paradigm shift, very healthy one in the past 10 years, transitioning from total reliance on government funding to shared participation, public and private. And with that, and you know me, Andrew, at this point, you know where I stand. I'm a big believer in the partnership between public funding and private funding together. Ideally, in every country, I would want a 50-50 split, because I think they represent a different approach on how to invest. And we get the best when we get two different approaches working together as opposed to just one. I don't think either one is perfect on its own. And I've said that before, until proven otherwise. But like space, that went through this balancing out and suddenly discovered that rockets can be reused, which is the biggest game changer in space that we've seen in our lifetimes. Right? It's slashing the costs of lifting mass into space by orders of magnitude. Is there a paradigm shift in regen medicine around the corner? Is it AI and its impact on clinical research and analyzing data? Is it something else? I want to start with you, Robin. Are you seeing something that's going to be transformative?
Yeah. So I think the exosomes technology is going to be transformative. I mean, we are so excited about what we see in what the ability is of these exosomes, the messages, the miRNA, that ability to turn on and off genes and to, really help your own body do things, help it do more. So for example, in aesthetics, it is the biggest buzz. And that's one of the things at Exotrope we're focused on. We have a line called Exoceuticals, and it's just incredible what we're able to do to help people have more density in their hair. And it's such a huge problem now. People are losing hair, to have their skin, from the sun, all the dark spots, the wrinkles. If you can help make your own cells of your skin make more collagen, more elastin, more hyaluronic acid, and improve the barriers and combat photoaging, it's tremendous what that can do to your, skin, which is 15% of your body. I mean, it's a huge organ. but also aesthetically, how you look, how you feel. It gives the ability to sort of address areas as we age that need help, and do it in a very cost-effective, safe manner.
Going to get rid of Apple photo filter. Last,
And I think that's the exciting thing for the future.
so this is a good news podcast. I love that.
Right? Hope and healing. As Andy said, I wrote a book, I don't know, it was 2007 now, right, Andy, called The Healing Cell. And it was very early in stem cells, and it talked about different patients' journeys in these clinical trials and where the research is to see how they could help treat diseases, and that really there was no other really treatment. We're so focused on treating symptoms, but how do you go to the underlying cause of disease?
Oh my God, this is tackling chronic disease head on, isn't it?
Well,
Yes.
have to do that.
Yeah.
And to close it out on a fine point for you, Roy, everything we've done in medicine up to this point in time has been to eliminate disease. But what regenerative medicine is enabling us to do is to restore health. And that's really a very, very substantial threshold that we're crossing over. And it's really, I think, because we've learned so much about disease, like cancer, and the fundamental mechanisms of disease at the genetic, molecular, and cellular level, role of things like inflammation, etc., that are now opening the door for us to not just eliminate disease, but to restore the health that was there before. Yes, we will get you younger one day.
You too, Andrew. Come join the party. I'm learning that your mastery of prose probably exceeds mine. I've got promise versus peril. I've got restoring health.
Healthy longevity.
It's like I'm reminded of JFK as a gift for prose here. It's beautiful to listen to. Last question. Knowing everything you know about U.S. healthcare, and I want as many people to know that I'm, as you know, Andrew, a huge champion of U.S. healthcare. I'm the first to report all the things that need fixing. But when someone puts a label, U.S. healthcare broken, U.S. healthcare lost, and journalists love those two labels, I have a visceral reaction to that, because U.S. healthcare is first, best of its kind, and we actually hurt the world by keeping that fact hidden, because I'm a foreigner pretending to be an American. And I can tell you, we could use as much help with our foreign healthcare as you're willing to offer. So given all of that, my last question is, Robin, is U.S. healthcare going to lead the charge on regenerative medicine, or is it going to follow?
I think it will lead. I really do. I think innovation is critical. People always want to come to the United States from other countries, when they have something, some terrible cancer or disease that they need, the best care and different options. And I think as long as the support is there for clinical development and innovation, that we will lead.
Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, I let me put it this way.
It's going to be a Taiwan semiconductor story.
I think we will get to the destination first. I don't know that we'll always be seemingly leading in the race. And that's because I think there are others who are leaping forward but failing because the leap was ill-timed or ill-conceived or without sufficient knowledge. So we're going at a much more measured pace, if you will. We're doing the basic research, the science, and we have the infrastructure to do that, as you have pointed out so often, Roy. What we have in this country is a treasure, global treasure. So we have that. And then we have the industries that are prepared to take those discoveries and develop them. And we have the infrastructure of delivery to be able to do it in a very thoughtful, measured, careful way so that we do more good and less harm. So we'll win the race. We just don't always look like we're out.
Very well said. What a great space to be involved with. And Robin, I wish for you a lot of talented people listen to this podcast and ask the question, how do I join the regenerative movement?
Well, thank you for having us. It's an exciting time to be in healthcare. It really is.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, and thank you, Dr. Eschenbach.
Hey, you're more than welcome.
Thank you for joining us on Analyzing Healthcare. Stay informed and stay inspired. Don't forget to subscribe and visit scale-community.com to become a Scale Community member. Until next time, keep exploring the ideas that shape our healthcare systems.